Welcome to another TCP walkthrough video. I'm Logan, and in today's video we're going to be going over the legal ownership of assets and beneficiary designations. And we're going to be doing that the SuperfastCPA way, which is diving straight into questions to learn the material. If you don't know much about our strategies, make sure you go to SuperfastCPA.com and check out our free 1-hour webinar training. We go over the key ingredients to passing the CPA exam, and again, it's only 1 hour, it is free, and you will save so much time struggling with your process. Make sure you go check it out. Also, just letting you know, we will only be going over 5 questions in this video, whereas SuperfastCPA members will have access to the full 10-question video when we post it in the members forum. So if you like this, you can get more of it and more practice by becoming a SuperfastCPA member. With all that said, let's dive straight into the questions. Okay, here is question 1. Upon the death of an individual, the determination of legal ownership of their estate primarily depends on which of the following. So, we are talking about estate tax planning in this video, and talking about, who owns the assets and who are the beneficiaries and things like that. So that's what we're talking about here. So what is the primary determination of where the things go in the estate? Now, if you don't know much about any of this, that's okay. We're going to dive straight into the answer. But if you know anything about estate taxes, you've probably heard about a will or a trust or things like that. So you might guess that. And you would be right. This is typically the thing we think about when it comes to estate taxes and estate planning, is the will and the trust document. So let's go ahead and read this explanation. Legal ownership of an estate upon the death of an owner is primarily determined by the contents of a will or trust if one exists. These legal documents specify how the deceased's assets should be distributed and can appoint an executor or trustee to manage the process. If specific assets are designated to pass to named beneficiaries, such as life insurance policies or retirement accounts, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, this transfer can occur outside of probate. However, for assets not designated, or if no will or trust is present, the estate will go through probate, and again, we'll talk about probate as well, where a court oversees the distribution according to state intestacy laws. Now, again, this is the basic idea. When somebody passes away, if they have a trust and a will, then that helps determine where the stuff goes. But if there's none of that, then it can go through something called probate and different things like that. So let's go to the next question. Okay, here we are at question 2, and this one's very simple. What is probate? So we heard a little bit of it mentioned in the first question, so you might be able to figure it out just based off of that. But what is probate? Is it a legal process? Is it a tax? Is it just a meeting? Or is it an audit? If you don't know, that's okay. Let's dive straight into the answer to learn what probate is. Okay, and the answer is that it is a legal process that validates a deceased person's will. And again, this was kind of mentioned in the first question. Probate is a legal process through which a deceased person's will is validated by a court. The court oversees the distribution of the estate to the rightful heirs and beneficiaries according to the instructions laid out in the will. If no will exists, probate ensures that the estate is distributed according to state intestacy laws. This process also includes paying off any debts and taxes the estate owns. But yeah, probate is basically the process of figuring out where stuff is supposed to go legally, and it's a court ruling and different things like that. Okay, let's go to the next question. Okay, here is question 3. Which of the following assets would typically go through probate? So we just learned what probate is. Now we're trying to learn what assets typically go through probate. So would it be a bank account held by a deceased person, a life insurance policy, a retirement account, a jointly owned home? If you don't really know much about this, that's okay. If you have an idea, go ahead and pause the video and think about it, and when you're ready, come back, we'll look at the answer together. Okay, and the answer is a bank account held solely in the deceased's name. So let's learn more about this. Assets that typically go through probate are those owned solely by the deceased without any designated beneficiaries. This includes individual bank accounts, personal belongings, and real estate solely in the deceased's name. Typical probate expenses include court fees, legal fees for the attorney handling the estate, and executor fees for the person managing the estate. There can also be costs associated with appraising the estate's assets, paying outstanding debts and taxes, and maintaining or selling property belonging to the estate. These expenses can vary widely depending on the complexity of the estate and the specifics of local law. So, essentially, the idea behind probate is anything that was solely in the name of the person who passed away, and there wasn't anybody who was supposed to receive it as a beneficiary, and there was no will saying what to do with it. It goes through probate, which is, again, this legal process of figuring out where it's going to go, figuring out what to do with it. It costs money, and there's a whole bunch of things that can happen with probate. So now that we've learned a little bit more about probate, let's go to the next question. Okay, here is question 4. Which of the following is not typically a non-probate asset? So, a non-probate asset is probably something that doesn't go through probate, but which of these is not a non-probate asset, or essentially it's saying which of these does go through probate. So let's think about it. A retirement account with a designated beneficiary, a life insurance policy with a named beneficiary, a house owned in tenancy by the entirety, which again, that's basically joint ownership, or a personal vehicle solely owned by the deceased. Okay, with what we just learned from the previous question, we know that typically it's assets that were solely owned by the deceased. So it's probably D. Let's go ahead and do that answer and see what more we can learn. Okay, yes, the answer was D, a personal vehicle solely owned by the deceased. So let's read about this a bit more. Non-probate assets include those that have designated beneficiaries or are held in joint ownership with rights of survivorship, allowing them to be transferred directly upon the owner's death without going through probate. This includes retirement accounts with designated beneficiaries, life insurance policies with named beneficiaries, and properties owned in joint tenancy or tenancy by the entirety. A personal vehicle solely owned by the deceased typically does not qualify as a non-probate asset and would go through probate. So we learned a little bit more about probate, but also about designated beneficiaries there. It looks like non-probate assets are typically the kinds of assets that have designated beneficiaries. Somebody has been designated to receive that asset, and since they don't have to pay anybody to figure out what to do with it, it doesn't have to go through the probate process because it just goes directly to that person. So it sounds like non-probate assets have to do with designated beneficiaries, and this is a way to avoid probate. So let's go to the last question to learn a little bit more. Okay, here is question 5. Which statement best illustrates the legal impact of beneficiary designations on asset distribution? Okay, we've learned a lot about this stuff so far. So which of these do you think is true? Are beneficiary designations just suggestions, or are they overriding to the will or the trust? Do they need to be reconfirmed, like, need to make sure that it matches the will, or does it only really apply to real estate? I think we know that is false because we talked about life insurance policies and things like that. But could it be any of these other three? If you don't know, that's okay. Let's go to the answer. Okay, the answer is actually that beneficiary designations on accounts like insurance policies and retirement accounts legally override conflicting instructions in a will or a trust. So even though at the very beginning we talked about how the will or the trust is typically the thing that tells you what to do when it comes to distributing somebody's estate, if there was a beneficiary designation that contradicts what the will or the trust says, that takes precedence. So let's read about it. Beneficiary designations on assets such as insurance policies and retirement accounts take precedence over any conflicting directions in a will or trust. These designations create a direct legal right for the named beneficiaries to receive the asset upon the death of the owner, bypassing the will and probate process. This ensures that specific assets are transferred directly to the designated persons, irrespective of the contents of a will or trust. This direct transfer not only simplifies the distribution of assets, but also significantly reduces the associated legal and court fees, as well as the time required to settle the estate. Consequently, this can lead to substantial savings in probate expenses and ensures that beneficiaries receive their designated assets more quickly and efficiently. So overall, it sounds like if you want to avoid probate, these are ways to simplify things and make sure that things go more smoothly. Okay, we've learned quite a bit in just these short 5 questions. Before we go any further, let's do one more part of the process called pillar topics. Now, the idea behind pillar topics is as you're going through the questions to learn the material, you will notice topics and equations and things that keep popping up throughout the questions. The things that are constantly coming up, and you know that they're important because, again, you've seen them 3 or 4 or 5 times throughout the questions that you've been doing that day. So you know they're important, so you write them down as pillar topics so that you can reference them and know them throughout the rest of your process. So let's go to the pillar topics for this video. Okay, here are the pillar topics. First of all, legal ownership determination. Legal ownership of an estate upon death is primarily determined by the contents of a will or trust, if available. So that kind of is the typical thing. But of course we know a little bit more, and we'll read about that in a second. Probate is a legal process where a court validates a deceased person's will and oversees the distribution of the estate. And things that typically go through probate are assets owned solely by the deceased, so nobody else has joint ownership and they didn't say who it was going to go to, so that goes through probate. However, assets like life insurance policies, retirement accounts with designated beneficiaries, and properties owned in joint tenancy typically do not go through probate because, again, they don't have to figure out who the asset is going to go to. That person already automatically has ownership of it upon the death of the person whose estate we're talking about. And then finally, beneficiary designations on assets like insurance policies and retirement accounts override instructions in wills or trusts and transfer directly to the beneficiaries, bypassing probate. So, typically, legal ownership is figured out from the will and the trust, and a lot of the times stuff has to go through probate, But if you have beneficiary designations, whether that's on a life insurance policy or things like that, or if you just have joint ownership with somebody, then that can kind of bypass the probate process. So it goes directly to the person. So we learned a little bit about estate tax planning in this video, and that's it. Thanks for watching. Make sure you go check out our free 1-hour webinar training on SuperfastCPA.com. We go over the key ingredients to passing the CPA exam, and again, it will save you so much time struggling with your process. Also, if you liked going through these 5 questions with me, just remember that Superfast CPA members will have access to the full 10-question video. So if you liked this, again, you can get more practice by becoming a Superfast CPA member. If you liked the video, make sure to like it and leave a comment. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you in the next video.